Someone has to be last, right? Someone has to be last. Good evening. We are in council chambers for a special council public planning meeting. It is Monday, April the 25th. It is 7 o'clock. Councillors, may I please have declarations of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda as has been circulated? Councillor Peary, Councillor Maracas, comments to questions? All in favor, please. Contrary? That is carried. Planning applications. I have a statement that I read. Welcome to Aurora's public planning meeting. The purpose of this public meeting is to inform the public and obtain input regarding the comprehensive zoning bylaw review. No decision will be made on this item tonight. Town staff will give us a presentation, and then following the presentation, members of the public are welcome to come up to the podium and offer comments or questions. After we've gone through that, we'll then ask members of our council if they have any comments or questions on the proposal. Should be noted that a comprehensive report will be prepared and presented to a future general committee meeting, assessing the merits of the item before us and providing council with a recommendation for consideration. It's very important that the town receive correct names and addresses of individuals having an interest in this item. Therefore, if you plan to speak at council at this meeting, or if you wish to be notified of any further council or committee meetings on the item being considered, you must complete one of the green interested party forms that our committee secretary, Linda, is holding up. Under the Planning Act, the applicant or residents have a right to appeal any decision of council on a planning application to the Ontario Municipal Board. But you must verbally express any comments or concerns here tonight, or submit any comments or concerns in writing to the town prior to council adopting an amendment. The Ontario Municipal Board may dismiss all or part of an appeal made in respect of this matter. This public meeting is being audio and video recorded. Your name, address, comments, and any other personal information are being recorded according to the Municipal Act and the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. This will help our clerk prepare accurate minutes and to create a record that is available to the general public, including the town's website. Questions about this collection should be directed to the town clerk. I will now ask the Deputy Clerk to confirm the notification to the public has occurred as required by the Planning Act. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The required notice of public meeting for the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw Review, file number ZBA-2012-ZBR, was provided in the Banner and the Aurora newspapers on April 14, 2016, and was also provided by mail to all agencies, boards, commissions, and interested parties. Public meeting notification for this item has been provided for in accordance with the Planning Act.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will now ask the Director of Planning and Development Services to begin with the presentation. Mr. Ramuno.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Council is aware, we started this process of the review and update of our official plan back in 2013, and that's when we held our first public meeting. So this is our third public meeting. 2013, we held our first open house. So this is our third public meeting. We've had a number of open houses as well. So before I introduce or have staff make a presentation, I just want to introduce the key staff that have been involved in the preparation and background work with respect to the bylaw. Jeff Healy, our planner, who's been dedicated to the update of the zoning bylaw, along with our manager of development services, Glenn Letman, and they will both be providing a presentation on the work that we've done to date, some of the issues that we're trying to address with this rewrite of our zoning bylaw. And we've also asked our manager of building services, Ashton Bazar, to attend to answer any questions with respect to specific interpretation questions on definitions or permitted uses. So I'll ask staff to begin with the presentation. The other thing I want to ensure council and members of the public, and the mayor's already mentioned this, notwithstanding the recommendations that I've put forward to council in the way of the report, our next action, dependent on what council directs us to do, would not be to provide a bylaw in front of council for their enactment. We will certainly continue to work with residents and property owners to resolve any of their issues that they may have and provide further updates to council at future meetings before we finalize the draft zoning bylaw and bring that forward for council's consideration and enactment. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. public planning meeting tonight is to consider the comprehensive zoning bylaw review, our file number ZBA 2012 ZBR. I have approximately 24 slides here. I will go through them rather quickly, but it's necessary to get through all of the provisions of the bylaws. I'm just going to do a brief overview of each of the sections as to what we've done, how we're going about our review, and Jeff is going to come up in the second part and go through the specific changes to each of the zone categories, which will I hopefully assist council and the public in understanding what we're doing. The zoning bylaw regulates development on all lands within the town of Aurora, and the provisions of a zoning bylaw are applied to municipalities under Section 34 of the Planning Act. Zoning bylaw is a planning tool to help implement the goals and policies of the town's official plan. In fact, it's the primary tool in doing that. And zoning standards and associated mapping help separate the lands into distinct classifications, such as residential, commercial, employment, open space, and environmental protection zone. And the bylaw also sets zone standards to address the different types of uses, appropriate frontages, performance standards, setbacks areas. Also sets provisions such as definitions, parking standards, and enforcement criteria. These standards provide legal enforcement regulations for development to ensure that the town's development and maintenance standards are upheld. Sorry. Why are we conducting the review? As identified previously, Section 26(9) of the Planning Act calls for an amendment to all zoning bylaws within 3 years after the approval of a municipal official plan, which occurred in September of 2012. There's been a number of attempts to deal with revisions to our comprehensive zoning bylaw 2213-78. Which has been in place since 1979. However, a comprehensive review has never been completed. The goal of the review, of course, is to update the current standards, incorporate new standards where appropriate, apply progressive planning regulations, maintain the general structure of the bylaw, and provide a clear, user-friendly bylaw for ease of administration and apply overlay zones. I just want to give a brief little introduction as to what some of the broader objectives and some of the feedback that we have to go through to deal with, that we've had to go through for the comprehensive review. There's a number of different interests at play. Some of them compete, some of them overlap, some of them are in harmony. And as outlined in the previous slide, there's a provision in the official plan that requires us to review and approve a new zoning bylaw after 3 years after an official plan was approved, so we have to deal with that. In doing so, we want to transfer identifiable and appropriate official plan policies into implementation provisions and standards of a zoning bylaw. We also have to respect lawfully existing permitted uses and standards that occur at the current time, so there's a little bit of competition there. There's legislative regulations which may conflict or override with those, and we've attempted to provide those through overlay schedules to the zoning bylaw, which are really more of an informative set of schedules to give users information that there are other regulations that apply. We'll go through those in a moment. We've also had to receive, of course, input from other departments and agencies who rely on the zoning bylaw for the implementation of their standards and enforcement. And we want to provide a bylaw that helps provide them with a clear path and language, standards for interpretation and enforcement. And of course, we've had to make corrections where they've been previously identified over the past number of years, both administratively, internally, and what we receive from public and agencies. We've also considered other municipal documents which have been recently approved and tested to apply best practices, again applying for clear language and progressive planning provisions. These have been quite helpful to us in knowing that what our purpose is and our process has been consistent with what has already been tested. We want to consider input from the public, interested parties, and agents who are looking to have the current zoning bylaw standards either amended or maintained to address what are perceived as their needs. Our goal has continually been to prepare a user-friendly document that follows a standard convention with easy understood terms and sections, with mapping that corrects any mapping errors, and using the most recent geographic information system mapping tools. We obviously want to be able to inform and respond to any council inquiries through the public meeting process, either if we can do it verbally or through any staff reports. And we want to be able to prepare a document that will also withstand legal challenges should they come up through any OMB appeals, either at the time when the bylaw is enacted or through the life of the bylaw. And we also recognize that the bylaw applications will be made and that we'll be monitoring the provisions of the bylaw as we've approved it and apply, because it's breadth and scope that applies to the entire municipality, and we want to be able to make any housekeeping corrections or amendments as may be required. We'll also be preparing in the final document a document, as I've mentioned a number of times, that is user-friendly. We hope to incorporate a number of sketches and so on to help inform users and readers so that there's clarity as to how we're going about in preparation of the bylaw. The sections of the bylaw, and I'll be brief on these, the ones that we're amending, one of the main ones is definitions, and we've tried to eliminate multiple definitions from the bylaw. We have a number of those that are site-specific or within the body of the main bylaw, and these include things like restaurant. I think we have about 10 different restaurant definitions because they apply differently to each site. We've tried to harmonize those. Same sort of thing with business and professional offices, and there's always been some issues with day nurseries, how they're defined. So we've eliminated any duplication there where we think it's appropriate. We reviewed and updated definitions where they're in need of that, and those include also things such as offices, converted dwellings, places of worship, retirement homes. They were lacking in our existing bylaw. And of course, we've added new definitions where new uses or new provisions have been applied, and those include things like drive-through restaurants, motor vehicle establishment, and pet services. Further in the general provisions, we have provided changes to, hopefully for clarity. We think we've got them clarity for such things as units below and above grade and building projections, which this council doesn't need to know about, but we deal with those struggles all the time to make sure we're clear on how those apply administratively. We've deleted or amended the general provisions to apply also some of our partners and departments to eliminate things such as farming uses. Obviously, we don't have the number of farming uses we did in 1978, so we've been able to compress those into a much more usable document, and also eliminate a lot of the issues that were previously responded to, such as air conditioners and heat pumps, satellite dishes, how those were applied. We've had new general provisions with respect to accessible parking standards, bicycle standards, and queuing for drive-through provisions. And another larger part of this has been a comprehensive review of the parking standards of the bylaw. The parking standards did not have a full list of parking standards for all uses, so there's a lot of interpretation or I guess general application as to how those would work. There was one general parking standard that applied to all uses that are not identified above, and that never was a good way to identify appropriate parking, so we have those. We've expanded the list to include all defined uses, so every use that's in the bylaw, we have a parking standard for those, so there'll be no questions about those in the future, we hope. And we feel that the standards are also consistent with the other municipalities that we've seen do these reviews as well. And that includes places like Oakville, Newmarket, Richmond Hill, Witchard, Stouffville, which have recently amended their bylaws. And now Jeff is going to come up and go through the individual zones and give you just a brief overview of how those work, and I will come back and talk and close on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and good night, or good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Um, Just wanted to start off with the residential zones. So before I say goodnight, I wanted to introduce to some of the new proposed zoning structure for the residential zones in Aurora. So just to begin with the single detached zones, we're looking to expand the number of single detached zones to 6. So we'll be continuing to use certain uses such as your estate residentials, R1, R2, R3. We'll also be maintaining the existing semi-detached parent zone, which is currently an R3 zone, but it's been recategorized to an R6. We'll have 2 townhouse zones that's currently an R6 and expanded to an R8 and an R9. Just wanted to explain the recategorization as well. Essentially, because of the evolution of town standards and how built form has evolved within the town of Aurora, the lot areas and the lot frontages of zones have essentially deviated pretty considerably from the parent zones that they were part of. So we have recategorized the residential zones, at least to fit them in a parent zone category that is more in keeping and more in sync with the residential zone that it's supposed to be with. So we have expanded the number of single detached residential zones, the townhouse zones, and also have consolidated certain zones such as the apartment residential zones, which we've consolidated from 3 into 2. So we are looking as well to eventually go through a consolidation of exception zones as well, which we'll be conducting prior to the final review of the bylaw and final council decision on that. And we will also be incorporating the permitted uses into a standard table. So instead of having the bylaw in several different sections, we'll be having it in actually 2 tables, one for permitted uses and the other one for zoning standards and requirements. So the first example that I have for you tonight, so out of the 19,000 dwelling units within the town, I've picked 2 at random. So I picked 12 Camano Road as an example of a zone within the town. It's currently a second detached or single detached second density residential R2. So it currently permits 1 detached dwelling per lot, a home occupation, and then it also permits a second suite dwelling unit as per a 2012 zoning bylaw amendment that was passed previously by council. You can also see the zoning categories, or the lot area, frontage, front yard, rear yard, building height. So you can see those existing standards. And as we're moving into the proposed zoning, we're actually maintaining and keeping those similar provisions. So in the permitted uses for, the only real difference is the recategorization. So we're proposing to recategorize into an R3, detached third density, and it would maintain the same uses, so 1 detached dwelling per lot, a home occupation, and a second suite dwelling unit. And then the zoning standards will also remain the same as well, with the 7.5 meter rear yard, 10 meter building height, 35% lot coverage. The only real change is that we'll be removing the minimum floor area requirement for residential homes, but that's already been covered under the changes to the Ontario Building Code over the last 30 years. So that will be something that's covered in another more appropriate piece of legislation. The second example I have is 38 Brooks Avenue, and this is in just east of Bayview Avenue in a newer part of town. So it actually has a site-specific exception zone, an R2 74 exception zone. So it also permits a single or 1 detached dwelling per lot, a home occupation, and has certain exceptions to not allow a teacher in a musical instruction studio. And you can also see its existing zone standards. So with the recategorization, we're continuing to apply the existing permitted uses and zone requirements, but we will also be identifying specific changes and differences, and they will be incorporated into into the exception zone for this particular property, as was previously zoned for that particular property back in, I believe it was 2002. So moving into commercial zones, so there will be actually a reduction of commercial zones from 10 actually to 6. So there'll be an establishment of zones to a C1 convenience commercial, a C2 central commercial, which is essentially within the downtown or historic downtown of Aurora along Yonge Street, the C3 service commercial, which is also generally along Yonge Street and on Wellington, C4 community commercial, which is generally your larger shopping centers along Yonge Street and along Bayview Avenue. Your major retail, C5, which is generally located along Bayview Avenue, where you find your Home Depot and your Longo's Plaza, for example. And finally, C6, residential commercial, which is similar to a mix of commercial and residential uses that we find on Wellington Street and along John West Way. And so we're also looking to create a table of permitted uses and performance standards as well, and undertake certain consolidation exercises as well if we find that to be appropriate during our exception zone review. So the commercial property that I have for you today is 444 to 446 Holland View Trail. It's located just kitty corner, intersecting with Bayview Avenue. So there are a list of uses here, which include retail, business, professional offices, clinics, banks, financial institutions, including a drive-through, restaurants as well, including drive-through and takeouts. There are 8 other permitted uses within the section, but that includes very specific uses such as optical supply, video rental stores, and automated teller machines. So they're pretty specific at least. And then we also have our specific zone requirements as well. So in the proposed zoning, we're looking to keep those existing uses. However, where there is a certain use such as a video rental store, which is fairly specific, that can generally be rolled into what would be considered as a retail use instead. So we will still keep the integrity of the permitted uses that are on the site today, but they will be more broadly interpreted under the permitted uses of the exception zone. We'll also be incorporating the drive-through use, which is a new structural component to the bylaw. So essentially, the drive-through use will continue to be permitted for that specific exception zone, but it will still be permitted as it won't necessarily be tied to a restaurant or specifically to a bank or financial institution. And in addition to the specific exception zone provisions to this particular site, such as setbacks for restaurants and limiting sizes for retail uses will continue to be maintained, including specific parking rates and other specific zoning bylaw exceptions that are specific to the zone. Moving on to employment. There will be a consolidation here for employment zones. We'll be reducing from 7 existing employment zones to about 3. So the first one is E1 service employment, the second is E2 general employment, and the third being employment business park. And so essentially your service employment and general employment are generally along the industrial parkway corridor in Aurora. And then employment business park will generally be employment zones that are west of Industrial Parkway, going into your Bayview Avenue corridor, your Magna complex, and also and also the general business park area that's east of Leslie Street. And so the existing business park zoning that's also on the eastern portion of Leslie Street will also remain and be consistent as it currently stands today. And so just for a general example of employment uses, or an employment site-specific zone would be 145 Engelhard Drive. And so you can see it includes a wide variety of permitted uses. The zone requirements are a little bit unique here as well. It has a minimum lot area of 1,400 square meters or 4,000 square meters based upon the height of the building, which is a little unique. And there's also specific building height standards as well based upon what side of the railway tracks actually the building is located on. So with our new zoning bylaw, we're looking to add more uses to this site based upon the policies of our official plan. And so we'll be including new uses such as banquet halls, clinics, motor vehicle rental establishments, office buildings, printing media, communications establishments, and private clubs. And also the zoning standards will also be standardized as well. So we're proposing a new zones lot area minimum of 2,000 square meters. The frontage and yard requirements will generally stay the same. The only difference being the interior side yard should be a minimum of 3 meters and a building height of 15 meters on this side of the railway tracks. So we're trying to work with we're trying to be respectful of the residential zones that are located on the west side of the railway tracks. We'll be proposing a building height of 10 meters, which is consistent with what's in the bylaw today. And then on the east side of the railway tracks, we'd be proposing a building height of 15 meters, which is a little bit further back from existing residential zones. And so now I'll refer back to Mr. Letman to talk about the rest of the Aurora Promenade.
Thanks, Jeff. Perhaps the largest change to the structure of the bylaw, because everything that Jeff's talked about is basically still dealing within the same uses. It's just a recategorization and ensuring that everything else maintains some consistency. But the largest change that we've had, and I think it's a little bit creative how we're doing it, is we're proposing to provide an overlay zone to the promenade area. Council are familiar with the promenade, and as shown on the slide in front of you, the area in red, pink, and I guess beige is the downtown, upper downtown, and the downtown shoulder areas. The areas in blue are the general and the focus areas. Within the downtown, upper downtown, and shoulder areas, we propose to overlay a zone on top of the existing zoning provisions, which would allow for an additional listing of uses that would be permitted in the bylaw. Those uses have been identified in the promenade as allowable uses, and through our review and trying to move applications through to ensure that there isn't any conflict, we are proposing to have that list of uses. That's identified in Section 8 of the bylaw on page 77. And they vary between the different promenade designations. So the overlay zone proposes specific uses that would be added, and in some cases there are prohibited uses, for example. And those uses are also outlined in the official plan. We are not deviating from any of the provisions of the official plan. We are layering those provisions on there. We don't propose to provide the overlay zone onto any employment or environmental protection lands within the promenade. Oh, yes, Mr. Mayor.
I believe Councillor Gardner had a question on the specific to the
Thank you.
promenade area.
I'm trying to look at these schedules that we have. Is any one of them the overlay to the promenade that you're talking about?
Yes, that'd be Section 8 on page 77.
No, in the map area. Sorry, in the schedules. figure 2? Is that map 2?
Oh, the location, I'm sorry, I thought you were identifying the list of uses.
This one? Thanks.
I moved ahead a little bit on the screen, Mr. Mayor, but the map on the screen, which is consistent with the mapping schedules that you have, identifies the areas of the promenade.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Gardner?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lettman.
So the overlay zone will not apply to employment lands or environmental protection areas. There would just be a clutter of too many uses that would all be permitted. And the application of trying to apply performance standards to those is not considered to be in the municipality's best interest. And so we will deal with any of those changes on an application-by-application basis. Existing illegal uses of the base zone would continue to be allowed. So as an example, this is the property at the northwest corner of Kennedy Street and Yonge Street. The existing zoning in the left-hand column identifies this as an R5-2 exception zone, and it's very specific and very limited to what can happen on that property. And the uses that are there: business and professional offices, excluding medical, photographic studio, and a bridal salon. That's always been a very restrictive provision, and any changes to that, of course, the applicant has to come back. We're proposing to maintain that allowance of provisions, but also overlaying all of the uses that have been identified in the overlay zone, which would include those uses that I identified on page 77. Within the downtown shoulder area, not all uses, but the ones that are identified within the downtown shoulder, which is what the designation is. So in addition to the uses, we also propose to implement the promenade policies with respect to parking. These are also seen to be ones that are pulled straight from the provisions of the promenade policies. So there's new area-specific parking standards that would reflect the different provisions within the promenade designations. These essentially have been reviewed as part of the promenade plan, an official plan that we went through back in 2010, and the uses are identified, the parking policies are identified in a schedule, which is Schedule 541 on page 59 of the bylaw. I won't get into those in detail, Mr. Mayor, but basically there's a reduction in the general number of parking spaces, primarily for retail uses. The current retail parking standards in those areas is about 4.5 spaces per 100 meters squared. For retail, we're proposing that they reflect exactly what we're being directed to do, which is 3.5 for retail uses. There's also provisions for new residential development, new non-residential development, and within existing buildings, the promenade policies apply that no new parking shall be provided, and we are also rolling that over into our zoning bylaw to implement the provisions of the official plan. This is the mapping that identifies the overlay zones. I know it's a little bit cluttered to see on the screen. Obviously, it would get blown up depending upon the zones, and of course, we have the means to identify those different designations. And again, those are the zones that would apply for both the uses and the parking provisions. Just to conclude, I'll move these through rather quickly because the rest I think is relatively straightforward. Obviously, we have open space and environmental protection zones. We've consolidated those and collapsed those and created more distinct uses within those zones. We've got public open space, private open space, environmental protection areas. And there's a natural hazard overlay schedule, which is also associated, which we've been in consultation with the conservation authorities on, which gives a broader area that I talked about earlier, which is informative to anybody who proposes to use lands or develop in that area, and it would direct them to the conservation authorities to deal with all of those provisions and policies that they would require. The Oak Ridges Moraine zoning, we do not propose to change. That's legislation that has been passed by the province. We have an official plan amendment specific to that, and we don't propose to change the zoning on that purpose. When the legislation changes, if and when the Oak Ridges Moraine changes, we will of course have another review of that, but we propose to retain that. In terms of mapping, this is another improvement that we think we've captured through quite a bit of review. We're including, we've got better mapping systems in place, so we can apply the mapping better to property lines. The interpretations will still be provided as to where those lines are, but we think we've captured that. We think we've eliminated a lot of the zone boundaries where there's been errors in the past. And the mapping that's included, as I mentioned, and talks about the promenade overlay. Of course, all of the schedules, which I think you have copies of, which identify all the zones right across the municipality. The promenade parking map, and then the hazard overlay mapping, and a wellhead protection overlay mapping as well. The Oak Ridges Moraine mapping remains the same. The exceptions to the bylaw is a tedious task. We have about 700 exceptions right now to the bylaw, and they're all put right into the text of the bylaw. That's why we have a bylaw this thick, what we're proposing to do, and we think we've really got a good approach to this. We're going to take out all of those from the provisions of the bylaw and apply them at the end of the bylaw under an exception section. So we'll have those, and of course we'll be making amendments or changes to those whenever there's no longer an exception required. Because of our review, we will be eliminating those. It's a much better administrative process, and will be user-friendly again for others to be able to see how it works. Public comments, Your Worship. To date, we've received public comments from 12 residents, 2 business owners, and 6 stakeholders. We've also been in touch with the Regional Municipality of York with respect to road widening provisions, Bell and Infrastructure Ontario, the Ontario Restaurant Hotel Association, and Canadian Fuels. Conclusion, Mr. Mayor, staff will continue to review the zoning bylaw, receive public input. We've been doing a peer review of the zoning bylaw as well, which has been very helpful to us, and we've recently retained a solicitor who's very experienced in bylaws. He's going to be able to bring us to that next step of hopefully getting a final bylaw prepared, and we would be pleased to bring a report back to council and have the bylaw presented to council for enactment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Glenn and Jeffrey. Appreciate the presentation. We'll open it up now to members of the public. For anybody who has any comments, questions with respect to the zoning bylaw, please come up to the podium. We appreciate it if you could give us your name and your address, and you will have 5 minutes. And don't be bashful. Well then, I guess I'll... Oh, here we got somebody. I should mention there's a prize for the first person that comes up.
Evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is John McDermott. I'm a registered professional planner in the province of Ontario. I'm here tonight representing the owners of 5 to 35 Furbacher Lane. At present time, this property is in an exception zone. As you heard earlier tonight, we don't have the details of the exceptions at this point in time. My client's concerned about that because of existing problems we have with the current zoning and how it's been interpreted or will be interpreted. So what I proposed is that we would meet with your staff over the next few weeks and go over our concerns in relation to this site-specific matter in an effort to resolve it prior to the bylaw coming back before council for review and consideration. I'm here tonight in the interest of protecting my client's appellant rights in the event that we are unsuccessful in resolving this to mutual satisfaction of both parties. And if you could just note the name, McDermott, and the property at 535 Furbacher Lane in the record, I'd appreciate that. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Thank you, sir. I don't. We'll get any other members of the public, and then perhaps someone here will be able to have a quick comment.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public with respect to the proposed changes?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Robert Miller. I have a card, but I will fill out one of the green sheets. I'm here representing York Region and York Region Rapid Transit. And as Mr. Lettman indicated, we have been in discussions over the last couple of years with Mr. Ramuno, Mr. Lettman, and Mr. Healy, and those discussions have gone quite well and have resulted in the incorporation of revised wording in the section that we were interested in, which dealt with the deeming provisions of the bylaw, which is basically if there is a taking by a public authority or a conveyance by an owner to a public authority who has the power to expropriate, and that taking throws them into nonconformity, they're deemed to conform. And we just wanted to make sure that the wording worked that way. We think we're very close. I don't have instructions to say we're satisfied yet, so I just want to protect our rights, although I believe we are very close, if not there already. And part of the reason I wanted to give my card is that actually my firm's been restructured, so I just want to make sure you have my new address so that we're on the record properly. So thank you very much. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any other members of the public? So, Mr. Ramuno, I'll just ask you to comment on those two items, or go to Mr. Lettman. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, certainly through you, to you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the Mr. McDermott, and I think Jeff or Glenn could speak to this a little more detail. With respect to the exceptions, that is our next focus, and we aren't proposing to make any changes to those current exception zones. They will form part of this updated zoning bylaw. And with respect to Mr. Miller, we have been working with Mr. Miller and York Region's concerns, and I think we're on the same page with respect to ensuring that the wording in the future or the updated bylaw will satisfy the region's, Mr. Miller's concerns with respect to the deeming provisions.
Thank you. I don't know, Mr. Lettman or Mr. Healy, if you have any comments on either of those two?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor?
If you have any comments with respect to either Furbacher Lane or...
No, I think Mr. Ramuno's covered that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just go back to the public one more time if there's any comments or questions. If not, I'll close that portion of the meeting and I will go to council if there's comments or questions for either Mr. Lettman or Mr. Healy. Councillor Peary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was stated that we last had a comprehensive bylaw completed in '79. I guess my question is that typical that we're going to wait, 35 plus years to review this document? It's just, how often do these typically get done? Is it every 10 years? Is it, 25, or is it 35, as is sort of what's happened here?
Mr. Ramuno.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, it's not unusual that zoning bylaws, do not get reviewed or updated because of, it's a significant undertaking. Ours, as you've heard, 79. I think, and Glenn, you can correct me, the only other municipality in York Region that has recently updated their zoning bylaw, I think, is Newmarket and perhaps Wichita-Stouffville. The rest of them are dealing with bylaws that date back to, decades. Again, within the town of Aurora, we have over, close to 20,000, properties, and they've all got some type of a zoning permission on them to some degree. So, our goal here is to, and I think it's timely, because we did update our official plan in 2010, and I think as Mr. Letman mentioned, one of the key objectives, and we heard that from council over the last few years, is to update our zoning bylaw to ensure that it implements our new official plan, specifically within a portion of the promenade area along our Yonge Street-Wellington corridor. So, quite frankly, once we, council gets to a point where we enact the bylaw, I don't think we'll be be undertaking a comprehensive review anytime soon. However, just to make it clear, as Glenn mentioned, that we will be seeing, amendments to zoning bylaws. It's just a natural course of things. We will continue to see those amendments, and we'll deal with those on a case-by-case basis.
Councillor? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess it's probably best directed to Mr. Ramuno, and then he can direct it to the appropriate staff. But just, it wasn't clear to me with regards to, it seemed like the expansion of certain promenade areas to other parts of Aurora. Specifically on the map, it looked like to include the plaza at Orchard Heights, the St. John Westway, where we are here now, as well as the GO station and lands around there. And so I guess I just want to get some confirmation that we are indeed doing that. And if so, does that implication mean that they're allowed greater height restrictions as per the Promenade Act, or the Promenade Plan?
Mr. Moon.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, and if we can put up the appropriate schedules. I mean, the intent of our promenade overlay is really the area along Yonge Street. The southern portion is down by, I guess it's Cousins, and the northern portion reaches, obviously north of Wellington Street up to about, I think it's just north of Mark Street. And then the overlay extends east of Yonge Street just to capture our Wellington Street Village section over to essentially the rail line. We weren't proposing to provide an overlay or those promenade uses throughout the entire promenade area, being the larger employment area by the GO station. But I think Glenn can speak to those. We're just dealing with the overlay would be dealing with the uses, permitted uses, and some provisions. Glenn, if you can just speak to what provisions, if any, we're factoring into the overlay provision.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Rumuno is correct. We were only proposing to apply the provisions to the downtown, the upper downtown, and the shoulder area for uses. And as I mentioned, we were not proposing to apply it to any lands that had employment zones associated with it. And the reason for that, if I didn't explain myself, I apologize. If you apply the uses permitted within the promenade, it's a full range of residential, commercial, retail, and then all of the uses that would be also permitted within the employment lands could potentially be seen as in conflict with their adjacent uses. In other words, if it's within an employment area and somebody came in and wanted to put up an apartment use that would be permitted by the promenade designation, you're obviously faced with a little bit of a dilemma there, especially as of right. What are the performance standards? How do you deal with the conflict of land uses of employment lands occurring directly adjacent to a proposed residential area? So the transition of those things happening would take a number of years, and there would be a lot of conflicts to that. So we've taken the approach of a sort of a step-by-step approach, if you will, where we're dealing with the three areas where we think we can best control those forms of uses. And through our monitoring in the future, if we decide that it's functioning, or if we can sort out how to deal with those additional uses within employment areas, we will add those. But at the current time, there's a conflict with those uses, which we think that council really should have the ability to be able to review through any zoning applications coming forward to determine the suitability of those uses and the provisions that would apply to those lands. Sorry, I'm going on a little bit, and I apologize.
If I can just My confusion isn't really with the promenade area as I understand it. It seems to be we've added new areas. And if I could ask that the proposed promenade parking map be called up, because that's where my confusion's coming from, and I'm not sure if other members of council has it or if it's just me, but if we can pull up the other schedule.
I'll go to
That one
Mr.
there is perfect. So if we look at the promenade general shading on the easternmost portion along Wellington Street, well, that represents the commercial entities that are at Wellington and St. John's, just below us. But it seems to have a promenade general designation. So my question really is, does that promenade general designation extend to it the same provisions as we have in our downtown core? For example, being able to develop that site and go up to 6 stories, like it is in the promenade. It's, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was not previously promenade.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Rumuno. I understand your question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry for the confusion. I think, Councillor Thompson, you're referring to, I referenced, northerly section that has the promenade overlay to add the uses within the promenade plan, but we also have extended the overlay even further north just to incorporate the parking standards within the promenade. So perhaps if Glenn or Jeff, you can just go through those two overlays and explain the difference. And the other clarification, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question, Councillor Thompson. The overlays are adding the uses out of the official plan to the zoning bylaw, also parking rates in those areas. But the other provisions, such as certain setbacks and heights, would not be incorporated into this promenade overlay. Again, because a good portion of the upper and downtown existing zoning, the C2, council is familiar, does permit up to 5-story buildings, and that's already as a right underlay use within that C2, which would remain. But I think if the guys could just go through the 2 overlay maps and what's included with respect to zoning and the uses, the extent of those areas.
Mr. Lettman?
Apologies for the long-winded response. Mr. Rumuno has cleared it. I know you asked about height, and Mr. Rumuno has made that clear. We're not applying that schedule in the promenade zone to this land use document.
Any other comments to Mr. Lettman or Healy? Councillor Abel, Councillor Gartner, pardon me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And first of all, my overall comment is the detail and complexity of this. And I just wanted to get a sense, is this all done in our department, or did we get consultants to assist? Give me some sort of idea, please.
Mr. Rumuno.
So you, Mr. Mayor. No, it's been done in-house, and the majority of the work has been done by planning, the 2 gentlemen there. The rest of the planning department have provided input as well, and our other department that's provided input is our building department. And of course, we've had other departments as well to a lesser degree, but most of this has been done in-house. We have retained a Bob Lehman, a planning consultant who's been involved in other reviews to provide some input. He's reviewed our drafts to date and provided some input to ensure that we're on the right track, and he agrees. He likes what he sees. The next part, we will be retaining a external legal firm to just take a look at this draft document to make sure that from a legal standpoint, it's in good form. We were going to do that, have that done in-house, but because of the capacity within our legal department, we felt it was best in my discussions with our previous solicitor to just contract that out. And it's a small component of work, and it's not we're not talking huge dollars, but the majority of the work has been done in-house.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's a great asset to have such background for our staff to be able to provide, because planning is a huge part of our, and it takes a lot of time, and it's good to know that a lot of these have been covered. I can't imagine how to go through this, but I will ask a couple of questions, and they're very general. It was remarked earlier that there were 19,000 units, and I think it referred to residential. And then, Mr. Rumuno, you said something about 20,000 properties, and I know they're not quite the same because I would think that would be commercial and. So if there's 19,000 units, am I thinking is that houses including apartment units and along those lines?
Mr. Rumuno?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, I think I mentioned we've got over 19,000 total parcels within the town of all properties of all types, residential, non-residential, parks and open space. With respect to households, we have, in the way of units, we have close to 17,000 ground-related units being detached housing, townhouse units, and we've got about 150 apartment buildings. Those are separate properties. Then with respect to business properties, we have close to 1,500 business properties. So when I refer to over 19,000 properties, those are individual properties of all types, residential, businesses, employment, and parks and open space.
So, thank you, Mr. Ramuno. So 17,000 townhomes, single detached homes, 150 apartments, so there would be a number of units in there, and then 1,500 commercial business properties, which would make that 19,000. Thank you very much. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I just came from Furbacher just before this meeting. I was doing some business there, and for exceptions that they're asking for, are those for uses, is that what we're sort of would be in mind? It's just so I sort of get an idea.
Mr. Healy, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. For this particular property, 5-35 for Bacher Lane, has it's an M1-5 restricted industrial service exception zone, and so within the workings of this particular exception zone, it actually refers to certain buildings within the property, refers to the general provisions of that specific zone. So it refers to the M1 and the M2 zones within the town, within the existing zoning bylaw. So with the change to the zoning bylaw amendment, this would then refer to the essentially to the E1 and the E2 zones within the new proposed zoning bylaw. So we would have to work with the owners to look at the new uses that are being proposed or removed, and we can speak to them further about that.
Thank you very much, and perhaps this is best one-on-one later, because it helps when I go in and see staff, and it's a great learning. But we have seen before a planning meeting where someone has come forward and is dealing with a plaza and saying, I can't, under the commercial, what's listed, I can't find a tenant, but if you allowed a bit more, I could find some other retail uses, and I may be able to find that tenant. Could I extend or expand on those uses? And it's up to council to decide. We've often done so. But is that sort of the idea of what we're talking about here, through you, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Healy?
Mr. Mayor, in some cases, we're trying to do that because the categorization, and I think you're probably referring mostly to the commercial zones, has been restructured under the provisions of the official plan. So previously we had, as Jeff mentioned, about 9 or 10 commercial zones, and they were kind of all over the map a little bit. But we've categorized them under those zones, and we've put them all under provisions for uses that conform to the bylaw and the expansion of those uses. Nobody is going to lose a use, and that's part of the legalities of what we're doing, or else we'll be doing this forever in front of the OMB and things like that. And there is an expansion of uses, and I'll give an example. Throughout the time, retail uses in the zoning bylaw have been specifically defined. So if somebody wants a retail, it might be a convenience store, or selling pet food, or something, or selling bridal supplies, or something like that, and it's been very specific. So when it comes to interpreting that matter, when it goes to our building department, who do deal with the interpretation and so on, they say, well, that's what it is. It doesn't permit all retail, it only permits those sorts of things. Now, we've kind of collapsed all of that where we can to call it retail, so that we're much, we feel more comfortable that we can do those sorts of things to allow a greater expansion of uses. So it's not going to capture everybody, unfortunately, but we think we've got a better broadening of uses, so that we're not dealing with that all the time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do I still have time, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
We did see on the overlay, the proposed promenade overlay, and we were looking at the 3 areas in beige. One was to the north, one was to the east, that Councillor Thompson brought up, but it was more to the parking, and then to the south. I'm just wondering if we could just go to that page. Yeah, but I think you actually had this up. Is that more or less the same idea?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it is the same idea.
Okay. So to me, it looks like there's 3 areas, north and along Wellington, where you have got this beige, and this is sort of an overlay of from the promenade study of more uses that can take place in these areas. Did I understand that right, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, it's an overlay that incorporates the same boundaries, the same provisions that are in the promenade.
And the overall that I'm trying to understand, I think I'm getting a grasp of, is that we are going to attract development and opportunities that will benefit the economic engine of these areas here in the promenade. Is that a fair statement?
We're implementing the official plan, and that is clearly one of the goals, and the promenade uses that have those expansive uses will allow a much broader array of uses to occur within the promenade plan, and that's being layered onto into the zoning bylaw. So in other words, we don't expect a lot of applications will be coming to council for uses unless there's something beyond that. They may be coming to council for other things such as height, some site-specific exceptions. We expect those sorts of things will definitely happen because we do want council to deal with those to determine suitability of what those are going to go. So they're not going to be eliminated, but when it comes to uses and hopefully parking provisions, you won't have to be dealing with those.
Thank you. And I think what I'm trying to get at, and it's just an example, just to help me grasp the concept, that you are, if someone were to come in and buy, or a property was for sale, for example, they could now come and look at this and go, oh, well, therefore I can see they've moved and I don't have to apply because what I wanted is now in this sort of uses that are now been amended and overlaid on the promenade. Now, it may be something else completely different, but if we didn't have this, then they would have to go through the process of what we normally see on Wellington, for an example, where they come in and ask to rezone it for property for commercial residential. This may eliminate that, so it might look a little more attractive to someone looking at it, saying, oh, I see that this is already zoned as such, or for
That would be
uses as
correct,
such.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone that's worked on this. I can't even imagine how much work has been put into this. One of you is smiling and one of you is not. Anyway, thank you. A couple of quick questions with respect to what Mr. Healy said. The area east of Bayview, does that mean that somebody won't be able to give piano lessons? It says excluding a teacher and a music instruction studio.
Through Mr. Mayor, for that particular example on Brooks Avenue, they're currently not allowed to have the musical teaching use currently. So that's being transferred over into the proposed zoning bylaw as well.
Thank you. So I just wanted to be clear on it. If I was a piano teacher, I couldn't give piano lessons.
In that particular zone exception, that's correct.
Thank you. Also, could you tell me what an example would be a drive-through use not necessarily tied to a bank or restaurant? Is there such a thing as a standalone drive-through?
Dry cleaning.
Well,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there certain, I guess a common example of that could be a Shoppers Drug Mart, for example, which has a drive-through use, or a Rexall potentially. There could be, I guess, a retail use that would be drive-through, but I don't have a specific example to point out for
There's,
that.
Councillor
Thank you.
Gardner, there's a dry cleaners on Yonge that has a drive-through.
the way of the world, that's true. Parker's. Thank you. So one thing that I found very helpful here, and Mr. Muno, I was trying to kind of get my mind around this when I was emailing you earlier. I really like the idea of having a zone category, as was presented tonight, a zone category, and then next to it a permitted uses, because to me, and probably for people who are coming in, just having a zone category doesn't say too much, even if it has, building lot size. But permitted uses, I think, would be really helpful. And also with respect to that, when I look at this promenade parking, there's so many different zones here. I mean, I know what an R3 is. There's some that I know what they are, but there's so many that I don't. So is there going to be a companion to this map that says what everything on here is when somebody comes in?
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the zoning bylaw text, I think, which you've seen, and it's similar to the what we have in the report on page 8 and 9. So, we will have a zone category, for instance, an R1, and, it identifies what that is, detached dwelling versus residential, and then it will have a next column that will identify exactly what the permitted uses are there,
Okay.
detached and detached, and then the zoning provisions. So that's the whole point of, updating the zoning bylaw to make it really more user-friendly, that, you will at a glance be able to determine, what the zone is, what permitted uses are, and, within that same page or the subsequent page, what all the zoning standards and provisions are, the setbacks, the height, et cetera. And the other thing that we are doing has been mentioned, we have collapsed some of the categories. We had, a lot of residential zones and commercial zones, and so we've collapsed some of those, and they're just a lot of they make more sense based on what we're seeing with respect to build form and the types of uses.
Well, that makes sense since 1979, if it hasn't been. But just to be clear, so I could come in, I could have a look at the parking map, promenade area parking map, and I would be able to have some sort of a chart that would be able to tell me what everything would be able to decipher all of this?
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, with respect to parking, there will be the parking rate that applies to, for instance, the upper downtown or the shoulder area. But then again, we elaborate that further because there is a parking rate for specific uses, whether it's residential or commercial. But that is similar to what's in our current official plan, promenade plan, but it will be a little more easier to understand within the zoning bylaw because we are creating those charts with respect to what the promenade parking standard is for a particular zone, whether it's, we've got 3 promenade zones now, the upper downtown and the shoulder area.
Thank you. And if we approve this, what effect will it have on the application for the 2 10-story buildings on the northeast corner of Industrial and Wellington?
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this zoning update won't affect that application because we're not applying that overlay to that employment area. That is an old employment area. So in those situations, we're dealing with that separate application, and there's an official plan as well for height. And if we do see future applications around the GO station, they would require to rezone the property, and that would come before council in a separate
Thank you.
public planning process.
Thank you.
Councillor Maracas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Ramuno. Mr. Ramuno, I know you said that we'd still be seeing amendments coming forward. I'm just curious. Many times I heard from a lot of proponents when I've asked them why so many amendments, and they've stated that because our zoning bylaws are so out of date. So here we are. We're updating them. Will we be seeing less?
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's a good point, and probably I wasn't clear. We should see less because with this update, just within the promenade overlays, we will avoid some of those properties along Wellington Street or even Yonge Street having to come in for a variance or a zoning bylaw amendment to add an office use or personal service type use. So yeah, I anticipate we will see less zoning amendments and even variances in some cases.
Thank you. And just follow up through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Ramuno. Councillor Gardner touched on the 2 10-story buildings. I just kind of wanted to know, so when this does get approved, would any application that's already been put forward, would that be affected, or would it be grandfathered in, or how would that work? Or would it just be for applications that come in after approval?
Mr. Munoz.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess it's really a question of the timing of when, council actually, when we bring forward a final zoning bylaw for council's enactment, and that's probably, the very least a few months away. So to be honest, I don't really see of any other application that we are currently dealing with that wouldn't have to proceed, notwithstanding us council approving this zoning bylaw.
Councilor?
Okay. I think it's great. We've staff have taken time to incorporate and update the zoning bylaw to fit the vision that this council, well, the previous council set forward, and staff within the official plan. So, stating it once again what Councillor Abel said, I think it's great because it's going to allow for that economic growth within the downtown core, and plus the benefit is we won't be seeing as many amendments coming in front of us, and we won't have to deal with as many, so that the applications will be more smoother and quicker to get through, and it would encourage more, I think more of that economic growth, and hopefully with this being approved, we will be able to set that vision that we've created, and hopefully other legislation will be changed in the future that will allow us to have our say, be the final say. And then just one more question through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ramuno. Once we approve this, does this need to be approved at the regional level?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no. Only official plans need regional approval. Zoning bylaw, once council enacts it, it'll be subject to appeal, but.
Okay, and I guess one more, I guess, how much weight does this zoning bylaw have as far as decision-making?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, it's a key document that council, that we have, and tool that our stakeholders use, because again, as you've heard, it regulates land uses, permitted uses, and establishes zoning provisions. So no, it certainly carries weight. I mean, it's one of the, along with our official plan and our zoning bylaw, the two key documents that a local municipality has to set its vision, deal with growth management, and deal with permitted uses and regulating uses in general.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. I think it's great that we've gone through this exercise to align with our official plan, as well as update what we've heard tonight is a long-needed update. But I guess I also want to know if we're taking this opportunity to address some of the other issues we hear, off and on from residents. And so on page 7, it talks to residential zones.
I'm going to hold, we don't actually have the report on the floor,
okay,
so would you
sorry.
care to put it on the floor?
Happy
and
to.
we can speak to it?
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. And then Councillor Gartner, are you seconding it? Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
So on page 7, it talks to residential zones, and one of the comments in the first paragraph is that, we continue to see the size of residential dwellings as generally increased. And so, we hear, at least I have, from residents, concerns about, bungalow buildings being bought up and then, torn down and something else being rebuilt or additions added onto it. And so, through this process, have we taken that opportunity to look at some of those issues and either address it or provide some additional, policies or guidelines to clarify certain positions? Because certainly, as houses get bigger and taking up more, coverage of the lot is a concern in some areas, especially in the downtown core.
Mr. Marino.
Certainly. To you, Mr. Mayor, with respect to the zone categories and those provisions I think you're referring to with respect to building heights, lot coverages, through this process, we're not proposing to change any of those current provisions within our current zones, even though we are consolidating some of those zones. Those existing neighborhoods that we have, whether it's the 2Bs or 2Cs or established neighborhoods, the zoning categories may change, but the existing approved uses within the zoning bylaw or provisions within the zoning bylaw, we're not proposing to change those. We're not, because again, we can't remove, permission or existing rights with respect to heights that are already, ingrained in the zoning bylaw. So if that's your department.
And I'm not necessarily looking backwards, I'm looking ahead. I mean, we see it as an issue that has come up. I mean, we've seen it obviously in some streets around Town Park, we've heard about it in Kennedy. There's different areas where we've seen that issue and it's come before us, and I just wonder, you know, why wouldn't we take this opportunity to look at those issues and maybe make some adjustments to the zoning bylaws to address that issue, or, you know, the other issues we hear about are, you know, not apartment dwellings, but, you know, houses that have been converted into apartments and they stay below the 4 or 5 unit threshold. And sometimes those are concerns that we hear from residents. And so as we go through this process, to me, it would seem it affords us an opportunity to address some of those issues, but I could be wrong. Maybe that's not the intent of it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a good point. We have clarified the converted dwelling definition. I think you referred to that. There are some zones in our older established area within our downtown. It applies to the R5 zone, which allows for converted dwellings. And so we have tightened up that definition of converted dwellings, because I think, you know, you're referring to that we've seen a number of those cases in the past where we don't believe, at least I don't believe, that the intent of that provision to allow an existing home to be converted to, you know, up to 4 dwellings within it is appropriate in all cases. So, and it was really a question of the interpretation of the language that we have. So we are tightening that up, and I think, you know, Glenn or Jeff can elaborate on that. With respect to, you know, the earlier question about you know, some of the issues we're seeing with just the types of new development or architecture. You know, we don't really have that direction. It's something that we may want to consider, but I think that is probably something that we can focus in on in our upcoming OP review with respect to some of these special study areas that we may want to address, as opposed to trying to deal with it through the zoning bylaw, because again, it may be seen as, you know, removing existing rights and permissions within our zoning bylaw.
So if I understand you correctly, you think it's more appropriate to deal with through that OP review than this comprehensive one?
Yes. If I can ask Mr. Mayor, if Glenn could just go explain the change that we've made to the converted dwelling definition within that previous R5 zone.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Bruno is correct. The existing provisions of the existing bylaw allows converted dwellings within any R5 zone, which is basically anything within the older areas of town. We've tightened that up because we felt it really wasn't an appropriate use to have as a broad use, and the way that the definitions of the bylaw were provided and the provisions of the bylaw, basically it allowed converted dwellings to occur within any building expansions. In other words, you could add on to a building, provided that building now had a certain size, and allow up to 4 converted dwellings. We've now restricted that, and the dwelling must be a certain size. It has to have been existing before June 15th, 1980, which is the OMB approved date of the existing bylaw, and it had to pre-exist. So you can't have it in a new section, a new portion of the home, and we think that's a dramatic improvement to what we have right now.
Are there any other comments to the report, to the motion which is on the floor? Councillor Gardner.
I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to go through the bylaw. Is that appropriate at this time?
What specifically?
Yeah, I had some questions.
Well, then this is your opportunity.
Thank you. In the definition section, I noticed there's no definition of shadowing. Did you discuss a daylight triangle? But when new buildings are built in the old parts of town or new structures, it's possible that a good portion of a residential area will be in shadow for the whole day. So could you just speak to that? Someone please just speak to that.
Mr. Mino?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think, Councilor Gardner, you're referring to the angular plane provisions and sun shadow provisions within our promenade design guidelines, and it is, you know, within our Promenade Secondary Plan design guidelines, and we do deal with the sun shadow impact of future mid-rise development and the impact on adjacent low-rise development. And that's sort of a process that we go through. It's not really I think, a provision that we can include in the zoning bylaw. I don't think that we currently have a definition, but I think it is a requirement for any development within our promenade to ensure, through the site plan process, when we actually do see a proposed development for a mid-rise building, we do require to ensure that as part of that, the design and the massing of the building, that it doesn't adversely affect adjacent land uses. The other requirements that we do have, and it's within our Promenade Secondary Plan, is to ensure that the building is developed in such a way that it's stepped back in certain cases where there's a staggering of the upper floors to avoid that impact on adjacent properties. But I don't believe it's something that we currently have in our zoning bylaw. And again, I think it's more appropriate to leave that to the official plan and our guidelines as part of our site plan review when we do actually see a specific development based on the built form on a particular lot. But it's definitely something that we evaluate at that stage.
Councillor?
Thank you. On page 21, I'm looking at floor area gross. Do we include basements in that?
Mr. Middle?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, gross floor area doesn't include basements.
Thank you. On page 39, in the definition of woodlot, there's a definition of woodlot, but there's no size attached to that definition.
It's under the OP, isn't it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, unless, I don't have that handy, but unless, Glenn, typically we don't have a size for a woodlot or a woodland. We do have, our tree bylaw that regulates woodlots of a certain size. Then again, a woodlot of, I think it's over 2 acres, is regulated by the regional tree bylaw, again, if it's deemed to meet their requirements, not only of size, but of number of trees in a given area. But zoning bylaw definitions and OP definitions, when it comes to woodlots or woodlands, do not identify, minimum size or lot areas.
Councillor?
Thank you. I have a concern on page 48 about section 4.8, page 47, about parking for a health and wellness center. I emailed you on this. It's not defined, and you said that it would be the same as clinic as long as there are 2 doctors present. But and not all health and wellness centers would have a doctor. How would we determine a parking standard for that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, again, we do have, and it's something that we're going to obviously, we can address moving forward, but we do have a definition for a clinic, and we do have one for a health and wellness center. When it comes to parking rates, we have parking rates for a clinic and nothing specifically for a health and wellness center. But, as council is aware, we've dealt with this issue many times, whereas a doctor's office, provided it is, the office employs less than 2 doctors, is really considered just an office use. As soon as you have more than 2 doctors, 3 or more doctors operating in a given area, it's deemed to be a clinic, and we apply the clinic parking rate, which is a higher parking standard than an office. With respect to health and wellness, we're going to take a look at that. We made a note of that. We do have a definition, and it really, the closest thing I see to a health and wellness center is the development that council approved a number of years ago, which was the Bellwood Health and Wellness Center, which, unfortunately, hasn't come to fruition. Right. But it's really a question of, in some instances, the type of operation, regardless of what, it's called, it's type of operation, whether they do employ, physicians, or they've got, meeting rooms, they're dealing with, sort of seeing people, on patients on a daily basis. But it's something that we'll take back to see whether we need to include a specific parking rate for, other operations than just a clinic and an office. We'll report back on that.
Councillor?
I think, and I'm raising that because medical centers generally require a higher parking standard. So we need to be very clear when we allow these things that they're going to have enough parking. And following on that, are we allowing any clinics in the promenade area where parking is already a challenge?
Either Jeff or Glenn?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are certain locations where clinics will be located, and that will be specific to the downtown and upper downtown areas.
Thank you. Councillor?
You just said in the upper downtown areas? Only in the upper downtown areas?
Clinics now, don't Councillor?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct, just the upper downtown and the downtown area, so both on the north and south side of Wellington Street.
Thank you. There's a section in here that deals with hydro corridor lands and the permitted uses, and one of the permitted uses is a community garden. And I would like to suggest strongly that we don't allow community gardens under hydro corridors. I mean, there are issues with EMFs, and although it hasn't been proven conclusively, the World Health Organization said that we should use prudent avoidance. So I don't really want to see food being grown under a hydro corridor. I don't know how council feels about that, but I'm strongly opposed to that. And in the section on pool setbacks on page 49, seems to me like it's a very small setback for a pool to a neighbor's yard. That's page 49, 4.12. I don't know if that's changed. Is that a standard? It's like for an in-ground pool, it's
It hasn't changed, Councillor.
4 feet. No, and we don't have any complaints on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, this section hasn't been changed. Setbacks are the same currently. It's 1.2 meter to the property line.
Okay. On section 4.13, page 50, it's talking about temporary construction uses permitted. I would like to ask the building department, do we have any restrictions when somebody wants to put a Johnny on the spot in a construction zone? Do we have any restrictions to keep it away, a certain distance away from the existing neighbor?
Mr. Bitar?
For temporary construction, this particular section talk about the construction trailer. It's like a construction office, and they're very mobile, and typically there is no setback specified for this type of use. It's temporary use. But if it's a temporary sales office, for example, we look at some of the aspect of the zoning bylaw.
Okay, just thought I'd throw that out there. I don't know if we've ever had any.
Councillor, you got about a minute left in your first time.
That's fine. Thank you. And 4.15, trailer or boat storage, it says you're allowed to put 2 vehicles that are each 24.6 feet. That seems to me, in a residential neighborhood, that seems to me to be a huge vehicle and would cause neighbors complaints. Is that also an existing? Okay.
Mr. Ramuno?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the boat trailer storage, those are existing provisions in our current bylaw.
Okay, so I know my time is up for the first time. So what you're saying is that the things that haven't been changed haven't caused us problems to date, generally? I mean, we did have one situation, I think it was last term or the term before, about a vehicle to transport handicapped children parked in somebody's driveway. But so generally, the things that aren't changed are things that haven't given us trouble. Is that a correct statement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. And we have made reference in the report that we are still reviewing the other issue that came up a number of years ago was the size of vehicles that are allowed to be parked in residential zones, residential driveways. So we are not proposing that standard to change, but we're still taking a look at that, and we have been dealing with one interested resident who's been following that. So.
Well, if I lived in a house and I had two 24-feet vehicles parked in the driveway next to me, I wouldn't be happy.
Councilor Maracas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Ramuno. Mr. Ramuno, the parking in residential zones, that hasn't changed, has it? Is that the same? The 2 parking spaces are required for all single and semi-detached units and a minimum of 1.5 for townhouses and apartment buildings. That's the same?
Mr. Healy?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the existing zoning bylaw has standards for single-attached homes currently has for 1 parking space per dwelling unit. We're proposing to increase that from 1 to 2 spaces per dwelling unit.
Personally, I like to see even the townhouses go up to 2, because quite honestly, I visited one of the neighborhoods on the weekend, and they're townhouses, and there's real big issues when it comes to parking. Personally, I don't think 1.5 is enough. I know we want to get people out of cars, and we don't want them using them, but reality sets in, and everyone has minimum 2 cars mostly, and unless we want to see them all on the street, I think that we should, even force the development community to, have spots for at least 2 cars. So I'd personally like to see that. So.
Any other speakers for the first time? Councillor Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Ramuno. Regarding split zoning, it seems kind of contradictory to a comprehensive zoning review. I'm trying to wrap my head around the concept. Can you elaborate as to, I can gather what split zoning means, but can you give some concrete examples of split zoning here in Aurora, and how, is that a long-term detriment, or is there a way that we can deal with split zones?
Mr. Mayor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Ideally, we don't like to sort of split zone or have one property that has, multiple zones on it. But I think, where we regularly see that, and we dealt with a few of those situations recently, is where we're dealing with a new residential subdivision, and we would implement and apply a residential zone for that lot and that dwelling, but we may also zone a portion of that lot as an open space zone, really to protect, vegetation or trees that are on that lot, or to act as a buffer, as an interface against adjacent lots. So that's really where you see the split zoning. But it's something that we do occasionally. But most properties, if you're referring to in this instance, we obviously, with the overlay, I guess you can call it split zoning, but we do have an overlay with the promenade, where what we're going to see now with this bylaw update is, a lot of the properties on Yonge Street have, this commercial type zone, the C2 zone, and so we are providing that overlay of the promenade zone and adding some additional uses. So that is, can be seen a little unusual, but we've vetted this through with other planners externally and lawyers, and I think it's an appropriate approach, because the intent here is to implement the promenade secondary plan uses within portions of our downtown area. So, and I think we found a way where we can manage that.
Any other speakers for the first time? Councillor Gartner? Might be more effective, actually, if you emailed Mr. Ramuno your questions.
Oh, I thought maybe they'd be of some interest. Thank you. Split zones could also be, through you Mr. Mayor, Mr. Bruno, split zones would also be residential, commercial? Is that-
Through you, that's right, and I can't think of any, but I mean, Jeff and Glenn, I'm sure we do have those situations currently within our Yonge Street corridor.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, a perfect example of that would be 55 Wellington Street West. And that's it's an
Thank you.
apartment building which currently has commercial zoning within the building that allows for a daycare center. So that's one example, and the rest of the building is a residential apartment unit.
Thank you.
If I can jump in, I couldn't think of any examples, but another area where we do have what you can call split zoning is up and down Yonge Street, where, you know, we have residential above and commercial at grade. So, you know, we customize that zoning. Currently, Yonge Street, we have a C2 zone, which, you know, it's a commercial 2 zone, but it permits commercial at grade and residential above the second floor up to 5 stories. And
So
with
I guess sometimes we encourage it and sometimes we discourage it. Thank you. Section 4.22 on page 54, talking about municipal services, no building may be erected or enlarged unless the land is serviced by municipal water. So that means we're discouraging the use of wells.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, and that's currently in our, you know, our official plan and zoning bylaw, that any new development is required to be on municipal services.
So if somebody was already on a well and they wanted to rebuild their house, they could do that.
Yeah, we do have existing zones, you know, our state residential zones that are not within our service boundary, and they're the only areas that are allowed to be developed on private septic systems and individual wells.
Thank you. I had a question about parking standards for churches, but I think I'll keep that one. On page 61, 5.51, we're talking about pavement. I mean, I think the idea is to encourage permeable pavement. Can that, but this particular section discourages it. So is there a way that we can put the requirement or persuade people to have that kind of payment, which is more environmentally friendly, in this kind of a bylaw?
Mr. Romano.
Certainly through you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, those are sort of, again, I think the old provisions that I don't think we've altered those, but, you know, as council is aware, whenever we are dealing with new applications, new site plan applications, you know, we always do encourage, where appropriate, permeable surfaces, you know, pavers, rather than, you know, asphalting the entire parking area. So
Thank you. I'm talking about ways to encourage it, and could we do this through? Could we do that through this bylaw?
Mr. Romano.
It's something that we can certainly take back and take a look at, whether it's appropriate to include some sort of provisions within the bylaw, unless Glenn or Jeff, you're aware of anything that we may have been considering already.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I think this section of the bylaw is more dealing with parking lot areas and trying to identify the size and shape of them, and encouraging certain defined limits of a parking area. And so it isn't necessarily, even though it does say, so it doesn't necessarily prevent the raising of dust and loose particles, just to quote the section of the bylaw there, it doesn't necessarily limit the types of materials per se. So if someone were to put in permeable pavers, that's at their discretion to do that, pending applicable building code provisions and meeting those provisions for parking lots. But this is not necessarily the type of pavers. It's more just to do with
The dust.
ensuring that it's a hard and stable surface and is applicable to what is considered to be a parking area, and working with driveways as well, and ensuring we have a clear identifier as to what a driveway is in a parking lot area.
Thank you. Glad to see the bicycle parking standards. That's new. And also with respect to barrier-free standards, we have a policy, or a ratio for barrier-free standards, but the population is going to be aging, and there's going to be a big portion of the population, the baby boomers, potentially requiring more accessible spaces and perhaps only for a period of 10 years. So might we want to think about that and plan for that in the future when we may need a lot more barrier-free spaces in the near future? Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Healy.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. The AODA is a new standard that's been provided by the government of Ontario for accessibility into public and private buildings, and it also includes parking standards as well. So we are looking to incorporate those 2015 AODA standards into the zoning bylaw to ensure that it meets the legislation that's been provided to us by the province. And this is also, further to that, this is something that has been consistently used in other municipalities as well. So we're looking to bring that standard into the town to make it something that's consistent with what's been practiced throughout other municipalities in the Greater Toronto area.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. 7.51, are we trying to make garages flush with homes and keep them from abutting forward? Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Muno.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that has been sort of an urban design sort of a principle dating back, well, probably over 20 years, whereas we try, as part of our subdivision approval process and our urban design standards, yes, we have trying to avoid having those garages protrude out in front of the main face of the building, and the setbacks have reflected that. So the garage has to be at least flush or recessed from the main face of the building. And most zoning standards do reflect that.
Thank you. And I just have two more, if you'll bear with me. In the amenity area, I always thought that amenity areas for apartments and condos, that there had to be an indoor amenity area, given our weather throughout the year. But I see from this that it can be either indoor or outdoor. And are there any parameters on how large the indoor space has to be, or if it has to be there at all? Through
you, Mr. Mayor, I think the way it was worded in the past was there was a minimum amenity area, and it was either indoor or outdoor, unless one of the guys has additional information.
And it includes balconies and porches.
And it could include balconies, rooftops, or external areas, or internal areas as well.
Is that something relatively new?
I believe that's been in our bylaw since day one.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have an existing provision in the bylaw that includes indoor or outdoor areas, and we found that was very difficult to control through the zoning bylaw. So we've reduced the overall standard from 18 square meters per unit to 12 square meters per unit, and we require it to be outdoor. There may be provisions which require indoor, lobbies and those sorts of things, but any of that's all controlled through the building code and is really outside of the provisions of the bylaw.
Thank you. And the last question has to do with second suite dwelling units. It's on page 74, and it says in a building containing a second suite dwelling unit, the minimum floor area for each dwelling shall be 35 square meters. That's like less than 400 square feet. Is that something new? I don't remember ever seeing that. Is that something new, and does that come down from the region? That's two very small spaces.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, that minimum standard was incorporated into our second suite bylaw a number of years ago. So that's just been moved over into this new bylaw. And I think that minimum standard applied to the second suite, and I think that we derived that from the building code minimum dwelling unit size.
The reason I'm questioning that, it says for each dwelling. So the main dwelling unit only has to be 400 square feet as well, less than 400 square feet as well. I don't remember it applying to the whole house or unit. I don't know, just...
Through Mr. Mayor, no, and the intent was, again, to set a minimum standard for that second suite within the dwelling, whether it was, in the basement or another portion of the home. But it was just to ensure that we had a minimum size suite size for that second suite. And again, it's incorporated in our bylaw as a right, but there's still a process to legalize that second suite. We have a second suite registration bylaw, so they do need to, they're required to submit a building permit application to our building department, and it needs to be reviewed under the building code and fire and electrical safety standards as well.
Thank you. I'm reading this wrong. I'm reading it in a building containing a second suite dwelling unit. Each unit shall be, but we're not talking about, we're just talking about the secondary suites. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It just occurred to me about the garages. And so we have below grade, they're allowed. I just didn't see it. If you could just tell me where it is. I'm in the 7 areas.
Mr. Healy, is that you?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a question back to the councilors. Are you just referring to reverse slope driveways?
Probably. Down, where you go down? Councillor Abel?
I guess so.
Where you go down to it?
Yes, where you go down, yeah. And often, it's a comment, but often when you do that, then the ground floor is up. And then if they want a second story, then it's usually a height restriction that they want an exempt from.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I did want to refer to page 64, number 6. It's the third paragraph there. It says slope driveways. So with this provision, we're recognizing the existing slope driveways that are within the town, and we would allow those to continue to exist. We're not allowing any future sloped driveways to occur within future development. I hope that answers your question.
It does answer my question. And while we're on garages, if they're separate from the house, you're allowed to have residential units or employment units above? Could you just tell me where that is?
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, just a question back to the councilor. Would that be a detached dwelling or a detached garage, or would that be attached?
Be it detached.
Okay. And so through you, Mr. Mayor, for detached accessory dwellings, that would not be allowed for human habitation or for businesses within the second story of that detached dwelling.
So if they've got through you, Mr. Mayor, if we see a second floor or an application for a garage comes in, then that's stipulated. It could be used for storage, but it can't be used for a residential use to rent out.
That's correct.
Or provide an in-suite, en-suite, or something like that for a relative.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Abel. Any other comments or questions, Council? Okay, thank you. Calling the vote. All in favor of the recommendation which is on the floor? Contrary? That is carried. Thank you very much. That finishes the business for this evening. If I could please have confirming bylaw. Councillor Peary, thank you. Councillor Abel? All in favor? Contrary? That's carried. Motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Abel, Councillor Thompson. All in favor? Contrary? That is carried. Thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you for coming out.